This is Trial Transcripts Exposed by Crime in Court with Heather. Raw courtroom reads with my commentary. Let's dive in. Welcome back to Crime in Court with Heather. This is the Delphi case. We're reading through the transcripts of the trial, and we are on the state's case, part 34. Our witness today is John Galipeau, who was I think he still is, the warden for Westville Correctional Facility, which is where Richard Allen was being housed in solitary confinement prior to his trial and being tortured, abused, being forced to confess, being drugged against his will. There were many things that we now have the hindsight of knowing. So let us get continue on with the reading of our transcript, and I'm going to shrink myself here. Oh, before we do, there is going to be arguments. So before we even get to the warden, we have a bunch of arguments before the jury comes into the room. So this is the beginning of the day of October 29th, 2024. Start of the day. The court says, all right, we are on the record. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are here on State of Indiana versus Richard Allen. I'll show the defendants here in person with counsel. The state is here by the prosecutor and his deputies. The juror members have now assembled. Are we ready to proceed? Mr. McLeland. Mr. McLeland says, Judge, the state is, yes. Mr. Rosie? Yes, Judge. We may need a quick sidebar before we start to just talk about some technical things. The court says, okay, come on over. Now, this is a quick sidebar, or I don't know how quick it's going to be, but it is a sidebar. So, this is kind of the way this went down, says Mr. Rosie. We're talking about two interviews of Richard Allen conducted by the police, the two interrogations that they're getting ready to play. So, both of these have been after the trial, both of them came out, and you can see him being interviewed first by Steve Mullen and then again by Jerry Holman. Mr. Rosie says there's one on the 13th and one on the 26th. So the 13th was redacted, and we've looked at that, and there's no issues with that one. Okay, that's October 13th? October 13th, 2022. Okay. I labeled it. I put it as state's exhibit, even though I think we're stipulating to it. I think technically Mr. Baldwin moved to admit it. I put a state's exhibit sticker on it. Court says, okay. Ms. Diener says, because we prepared the redacted version. Yeah. Mr. Rosie says the 26th is, so there's a few issues with this one. The polygraph or the redactions are mostly polygraph references. The court says, okay. Mr. Rosie says there are a couple of different instances where Trooper Holman leaves the room and comes back, kind of a typical interrogation kind of stuff, and that I think we're all kind of used to seeing, and they redacted those. I don't have a problem with them doing that, except I think the jury should know. I think it's important that they know the context that he's leaving and so then coming back. Can you see him leaving, or is it? I don't think so. Very odd uh, editing as far as this interrogation. Jerry Holman just disappears and reappears in the room. You don't show him leaving or entering. Mr. McClellan says, I don't think so. We basically took it out to make it shorter. That's all. Uh-huh. If you did anything, Mr. McClelland, I am suspicious of it. The court says, okay. Mr. Rosie says, yeah, so. Mr. McClelland says, but obviously. Mr. Baldwin says, and we don't. Mr. McClelland says, made it shorter. So everyone's talking, but no one's saying anything. Mr. Rosie says, but I have a transcript where it references, hey, he's leaving and coming back. We thought maybe we'd give that to you and you'd explain it to the jury. Let them know when he leaves the room. The court says, do you care? Mr. McClelland says, I don't care. The court says, I think Mr. Cleland says, no, I'm fine with it. Mr. Rosie says, they need context of that. The court says, no, 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 I don't have a problem with that. Mr. Rosie says, yeah. The court says, but since I don't know any of that, Mr. Rosie says, I have it marked. The court says, okay. Mr. Rosie says, the other thing is that there's a reference. I'm looking for the page. Yeah, so there's a reference here that says, this is Jerry Holman talking. Trooper Holman, I'm telling you, we collected the weapon on the 14th and we found the girls dead on Ron Logan's property back by the creek next to the bridge that you were on. They redacted that as well because it has Ron Logan's name in it. Why would you redact that? We're going to make an objection just because it needs to be consistent with our third party motive position in this case that we believe that third party, the court says, okay. Mr. Rosie continues, third party evidence should come in, and I don't want to be to acquiesce to this just because. The court says, I understand. Mr. Rosie says, it was Ron Logan's name. The court says, I understand. Mr. Rosie says, we'll just lodge that objection. The court says, okay, okay. Mr. Rosie says, then the other thing I actually just noticed is it is what it is. I just noticed it, but the last redaction at the bottom. The bailiff says, folks in the gallery, they're making a record over here. You're talking and the microphones are picking it up, says the bailiff. All right. Mr. Rosie says they redacted the part where he was arrested and there's no reference in there to anything involving polygraph. So Mr. Baldwin says, and I understand that you may have thought that we wouldn't want him arrested or something. I think in a normal case, a good defense would be barking up a tree about that, but we're not. Mr. Rosie says, I mean, it's already redacted. We can't show them now because we're sitting here almost ready to tee it up. So maybe what we could do is just put in the transcript page to show them at the end that they have the transcript that's what I'm talking, or that's what I'm thinking we may do. Just offer that up. Just that page, says the court. Mr. Rosie says, yeah. Well, we're going to have to clearly redact the polygraph stuff. The court says, right, right, right. Mr. Rosie says, but the end here, I think that's the part of it. They arrested him, and I think for context, that should be in there. Mr. Baldwin says, or maybe the judge could even read it into the record. I don't know. Mr. Rosie says, okay. Mr. McClellan says, I don't have a problem. We took it out for obvious reasons. I don't think the defense would like it. So the court says, okay. Mr. McClellan says, to save it time, something, something. But if they want it in, I don't have a problem with it. I can have Jerry Holman, if we could limit the scope of his testimony, I could have him get up there, blah, blah, get up there and introduce that and say, there are parts of the video where I step out that we cut out, and we've cut out the end where we actually put him in cuffs. I don't, or you can do it, meaning the judge can do it. Mr. Rosie says, you want to just read it to them, let them know the end was redacted and the court says, that's fine. Are reading it into the record, says Mr. Rosie. Court says, sure. I'll go get you the court says, let me see it so I know what I'm reading. Mr. Rosie says, yeah, it's this part only. The court says, is it question and answer? Let me go and see if I can get the other. Mr. McClellan says, our intent's to play these first then. Court says, okay. Mr. McClellan says, it's about an hour each, so it's going to be 2 hours of them watching. Okay. And I'm hoping we can do both of them. I've got them all here, so I'm hoping. Mr. Rosie says, these post-its are the references to him coming and going. Mr. McClellan says, I highlighted them too. The court says, okay. Mr. McClellan says, because there's 2 of them. The court says, okay, so I should have this on the bench with me as we go. Mr. Rosie says, yeah, you can follow along. Yeah. Court says, just so I can follow along. And then I will tell the jury at the very beginning, I will tell them at the beginning that I don't want to write this or to write on this. Mr. Rosie says, it's a copy, just a copy. I mean, I understand you're using it, so it could be part of the record, but it's just one of the copies. I've got the original. Court says, so you want me to tell them that portions of the interview have been redacted as they don't pertain to this investigation? Yeah, by agreement of the parties or something. So there's Mr. McClellan says, Mr. Rosie says, I think that's fine. Just kind of keep it neutral. The page 79 should be in there actually, the end of this. So yeah, it would be, court says, okay, so with that, Mr. Rosie says it'd be lines 18 through, Ms. Auger says, you want me to get a post-it? Court says, no, but you want me to? Mr. Rosie says, yeah, just read it in then. Court says, it's going to stop here. You've had your effing up opportunity. That's what the transcript reads. She's not just swearing at them. that's what that's what Jerry Holman says. That's where the transcript ends. Mr. Rosie says, mm-hmm. The court says, and then he leaves the room, and then you want me, RA is your client, so I'm fuck, fuck you, police. Oh, Mr. Rosie says, yeah. The court says, okay. Mr. Rosie says, and then, so that I guess that's what Richard Allen said was fuck you, police in the room. Mr. Rosie says, and then the court says, you want me to read this? Yeah, I mean, if the court's willing to do that, that's fine. That'll save us bringing a witness up, and no, that's stupid. And then the second page, Mr. Rosie says, the court says, as long as we're all in agreement on it. Mr. Auger says, yeah. Mr. McClellan says, no objection. Mr. Rosie says, it's page 80. It's just kind of trickles over into the next page. All right? Yeah, says the court. Mr. Rosie says, thank you. Ms. Auger says, thank you. The court says, okay. Mr. McClellan says, I'm going to go ahead and put the first one in. There will be a little bit of a lull when we change out. The other issues is somebody broke the wheels on the thing last night, so it may take us a little bit to get it positioned so the jury can see it. So their whatever tray or cart they have their TV on or whatever. The court says, "Oh, nice. Okay." And then something is inaudible by Mr. Rosie. Mr. McClellan says, "Possibly, but that's besides the point. We're going to try to get it positioned where they can see it." The court says, "Okay." Mr. McClellan says, "So that's going to take us a little bit at this point." The court says, "Because you're going to have to like pick it up and okay." Mr. McClellan says, "Correct." The court says, "Okay." Sidebar conference concluded. The court then says, okay, all right, so by agreement of the parties, the state's gonna introduce the two statements from October, I think it was the 13th and October 26th. You want me to explain to the jury at the time that the interviews are being played, prior to them being played, that portions of the interviews have been redacted as they don't pertain to the investigation by agreement of the parties. This really doesn't remedy it because you don't know when Jerry Holman leaves the room or not, but whatever. Either the defense's hands are tied. At this point, there is a portion at the end where the state redacted Mr. Allen being arrested, and you want me to read that portion of the interview beginning on page 79, line 18, concluding on page 80 at line 5. Although I don't need to say, and further, the witness saith not. Okay? So I'm not gonna go, okay, so with that understanding, with the redactions, are we ready to go? Mr. McClellan says, Judge, yes. Just so the record's clear, the state would move to admit what's been marked as State's Exhibit 290, which is the redacted interview from October 13th of 2022, and the State's Exhibit 291, which is the redacted interview of Richard Allen from October 26th of 2022. Mr. Rosie says no objection. The court says all right. So without objection, I'll show these items admitted and then publication will occur when the jury comes back. Mr. McGlynn says correct, Your Honor, and I can move this again and I guess have the get it up and ready to get it set up and ready to go. The court says, okay, all right, gentlemen. The bailiff says, all rise. The jury enters the room. The bailiff says, thank you. You may be seated. The court says, thank you. Gentlemen, all right. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's nice to see you back this morning. I'll give you a moment there to get all settled in. We have provided to you defendants exhibits Q through V as in Victor. Those will be images that I think there was a little bit of confusion earlier on or not. You had all of the earlier on whether or not you had all of those. So, out of an abundance of precaution, I've asked the defendant to provide those to you in stapled packets so you have that now. I think it was on the top of your materials. Again, we have extra copies of extra pads of paper and pens, so just continue to let us know what your needs are as we are getting through the trial. And again, as we have parted company, ladies and gentlemen, if you've had the opportunity to have access to your electronic devices for purposes of communicating with your families and to check what your work area emails, I know this is the time of year where everybody is having to re-enroll in their insurance, and I think all of us have had that experience. So I know that several of you have had as well. So I hope that you've been able to accomplish that. So, to that end, ladies and gentlemen, have you read, seen, or heard any media accounts concerning this case? That was a weird thing to throw in about the re enrolling into your insurance at this time of year. That was a weird thing to throw in. But okay. All the jurors answered in the negative. The court says, have you discussed this case with anyone? Jurors say no. Have you permitted anyone to discuss this case with you? Jurors say no. Have you conducted any research into this case? All jurors say no. And has anybody persisted in attempting to discuss this case with you? All jurors respond in the negative. The court says, all right. Well, again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your continued compliance with the court's directives to avoid outside influences. I believe we are ready to continue, Mr. McLeland. Mr. McLeland says, Judge, on Saturday, and the state and the defense talked about interviews done between Steve Mullen and Tony Liggett and Richard Allen on October 13th, 2022, and then Jerry Holman and Richard Allen on October 26th of 2022. The parties have stipulated to a redacted version of those, and I've admitted those into evidence as States Exhibits 290 and 291, and we've discussed with the court and with the defense and the court with the court's permission. I would like to play the two videos, redacted videos, first starting with October 13th and then moving into October 26th as a way to publish that to the jury. The court says, okay, and Mr. Rosie, I know that you and the state had the opportunity to discuss the redactions. And ladies and gentlemen, the redactions are just portions of the interview that have been removed that don't pertain to the investigation so that you're not wasting a bunch of time with people not having anything to do with this case. So that's the purpose of that. People? What is she talking about? People that don't have to do with this case. It's about a polygraph or about Jerry Holman leaving the room. Anyways, any objection to that publication? Then Mr. Rosie, he says, no, Your Honor. The court says, all right, thank you very much. You may proceed. Mr. McLeland says, and Judge, we may have to reposition the TV. Not only that, we may have to work with the volume, so I'll need a little bit of feedback from the jury. I want to make sure that that everybody can see and hear it. So the first question is, can everybody see? Can the jury see the screen sufficiently enough, or should I move it? The court says everybody can see. Okay. Mr. McClellan says, okay, I may have to play with the volume a little bit. The court says, okay. Mr. McClellan says, but we'll go ahead and get started here. States Exhibit 290 is published by playing. So they played the video with redactions of I'm assuming they first played the October 13th interview. The court says, gentlemen, we're going to have to take a quick break. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and take our morning break. While you're outside the courtroom, please keep your minds open. Please don't form any opinions or conclusions about anything. You may discuss the evidence that you've heard so far, but please only do it if all 15 of you are present in the room and at the same time, and please don't deliberate. That is unprecedented. I've never heard of them being able to discuss the evidence prior to deliberating, but in Judge Gull's courtroom, anything goes according to her rules. So I guess you can do that, but you can't deliberate. The bailiff tells them to all rise. The jury leaves. The court says, all right, let's take 15 minutes, folks. Jody, you can go off the record. They do. Then they come back. Another sidebar is conducted. Mr. McLellan says, listening to the redacted version, and there's a question. Have you ever been on Ron Logan's property? Have you mushroom hunted there? It's not redacted. I've looked. I can't find it in the transcript, but he says it in there. Court says, okay. Mr. McClellan says, but I don't want it to be thought that the state opened the door for some kind of third party. But you did. I can't find it in the transcript and I don't want to hold up the jury. I don't have a problem. This couldn't you be like, you're not allowing them to have a third party defense, but yet you're not redacting the third party culprit's name in there, and the jury doesn't know that they're a third party culprit. That's the problem. They don't know that Ron Logan has been investigated. They don't know that it, Ron Logan was investigated by the FBI, no less, and the things that he said and the confessions that he's made. So the jury's not getting the full context of the Ron Logan portion of it, and it could be very misleading. So I would almost say this is possibly mistrial worthy by saying, oh, yeah, we redacted it. We didn't put it in the transcript, and oops, it wasn't actually redacted and they heard it, but we're not allowing the third part. I don't know. It seems very odd to me how that happened. Mr. McClellan goes on and says, but I don't want it to be thought that the state opened up the door for some kind of third party. I can't find it in the transcript and I don't want to hold up the jury. I don't have a problem if it's in there as long as it's agreed to that it's not me opening the door. The court says, okay. Mr. Rosie says, yeah, they're general references to him anyway. They're not references to him being a suspect, so I'm fine with that, says Mr. Rosie. The court says, okay, so you're okay with it. Mr. Rosie says, I'm not going to make any arguments. Yeah, I think that's, I don't know. I guess you pick and choose your battles, but I think that's a big problem. I guess it's not to Mr. Rosie. Court says, okay. Mr. McLeland says, I was okay if they come in, so the court says, okay, perfect. All right. And this is the one where you want me to, at the very end? Mr. Rosie says, yeah, right. Court says, do you want me to say anything about him going in and out, or was that? Mr. Rosie says, yeah, I think we should just let the jury know. The court says, but Mr. Rosie says, I just feel like the context is important. It's an interrogation. Yeah, it should be noted if the interrogator's leaving the room for whatever reason, because it's often, they do that a lot. It's a technique to try to make them sweat it out. You make them sweat and start perceiving their behaviors while they're there when no one else is in the room. Do they say something to themselves? Do they act weird? Is there something suspicious that, they're giving you the sus vibes? So it's a technique that they do all the time. It's important, I think. It's important context for the jury to know that he was left there for however long by himself to sweat it out. Mr. McClellan says the video's already in there, so are you gonna inaudible? I think we've established that. You can let the jury know. The court says that there are moments where Trooper Holman is leaving. Mr. Rosie says, yeah, that's fine. The court says, are you okay with that, Nick? Mr. McClellan says, I'm sorry. Where I just say there are moments where Trooper Holman leaves and re-enters. Mr. McClellan says, yeah, this is an hour and 34-minute video. There's times cut out and that we didn't think it was going to be more than an hour, even though I thought it was. Mr. Rosie says, yeah, that's more than one lie I counted. So he's calling him out for being a liar, even though he just like told on himself. But anyways, Mr. McClellan says, yeah. The court says, okay. Mr. Rosie says, yeah, I think maybe the context form is just like the first video. There's a few occasions where the court says, okay, they saw that on the first video. The court says, yeah, okay, I can do that. All right. Sidebar conference concluded. The court says, okay, then I will just inform the jury when they come back in that there are moments where, like in the other video, where the officers are leaving and re-entering the room, and then by agreement of counsel, I'll be reading that the last little bit at the very end where it's redacted, but there is still activity that you would like me to share with the jury, those pages. Mr. Rosie says agreed. The court says page 79 and 80, those couple lines. Mr. McLeland says, yes, Judge. Mr. Rosie says, agreed. The court says, all right. All right, gentlemen. Bailiff says, all rise. Bailiff, the jury comes in, and then the bailiff says, all right, thank you, you may be seated. The court says, thank you, gentlemen. All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, we're now going to publish the other interview for you. And as I told you on the first interview, there are portions that have been redacted that just kind of cut out uh, some dead time and things that aren't pertinent to the investigation. And again, moments where the officers are entering and exiting the room. Mr. McLeland says, thank you. The court says, Mr. McLeland. So now the exhibit plays. This would be his interview with Jerry Holman. The court says, all right, and ladies and gentlemen, there's a little bit at the end of this that the parties have asked me to read you of the transcript. Detective Jerry Holman left the room, and you saw that. Rick Allen says, fucking police. Oh. Detective Jerry Holman re entered the interview room and stated, Jerry Holman, all right, stand up. Put your hands behind your back. You're being detained for the murder of Abby Williams and Libby German. Rick Allen, the witness, complies with that directive. Jerry Holman then states, hang on, I want to make sure those don't tighten up. Are you okay right now? Rick Allen says, yeah. Jerry Holman says, and they should not tighten up this way. And then Detective Jerry Holman and Richard Allen leave the interview room. That concludes our proceedings for this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and break for lunch. Again, while you're outside of the courtroom, please keep your minds open. Don't form any opinions and conclusions about anything. You may discuss the evidence, but don't deliberate. Okay. The jury leaves. The court then says, you may be seated. All right. Is there anything that we need to discuss outside the presence of the jury, Mr. McLeland? No, Your Honor. Mr. Rosie? No, Your Honor. Okay. All right. Well, we'll be in recess till about 1:45, and if everybody would just kind of sit tight for a minute till the jury gets back to the jury room, we'll then allow you to leave. Jody, you can go off the record. And they do. And then they come back on the record an hour later. The court says, okay, we're back on the record. I see Ms. Diener and Ms. Auger have not rejoined us, but are we ready to proceed, Mr. McLeland? Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Rosie? Yes, Your Honor. All right, gentlemen. Judge, should we have a quick sidebar, says Mr. Rosie. The court says, sure. So now another sidebar. This day, there's like no testimony this day. I was just thinking about some mechanics again. So we're getting ready to get some DOC people in here. So some of those confessions are going to come in. And I thought maybe I would just go ahead and make my objections now. The court says, okay, and incorporate everything that I argued in the hearings in July. Okay. The last 3 days in July, I think the 31st might have been. The court says July 30th to August 1st. Mr. Rosie says, there you go. Yeah. The court says it was on the 31st. Mr. Rosie says, so I'll just go ahead and incorporate those. That way we're not, doing this. The court says, okay, on the fly here. Okay. Mr. Rosie says, and then the same thing with regard to testimony from the guards, inmates, other prison officials about about his demeanor and all that. Those were arguments we made in Fort Wayne. Court says correct. In Allen County, on those dates that you gave me, I'd like to move to incorporate those as well. Court says, I think it was the 17th of, Mr. Rosie says, of I've lost my inaudible. The court says, I don't know what even today is. It was the 17th of October because we started jury selection the 14th, and then this is the 29th. Mr. Rosie says, yeah, you're right. It was during that. The court says the motions were after that. I think it was after we picked the jury. You'll all come back and we argued the motions and then we all came down here. So I moved to incorporate, says Mr. Rosie, those legal arguments as well. Okay, says the court. Mr. Rosie says, and then that way we're not making any objections. The court says, I appreciate that. Mr. Rosie says, okay. The court says, that way because you've made a great record at all those hearings. So I think we can, and I'll grant your motion to incorporate all of those. Mr. Rosie says, okay. The court says, into these proceedings. Mr. Rosie says, very good. The court says, thank you. Sidebar conference concluded. Bailiff says, all rise. The jury is now back in the room. The bailiff says, thank you. You may be seated. Court says, well, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I hope lunch was okay. We are ready to continue. Mr. McLeland, you may call your next witness. Mr. McLeland says, Your Honor, the state of Indiana would call John Galipeau, please. The witness is then sworn in. Will you state your name, please? John Lawrence Galipeau. Mr. Galipeau, I'm going to ask you to keep that good speaking voice up. The microphone doesn't amplify for the defense or for the jury. It only amplifies for the audience. So we just need to be able to hear you. So speak loud enough for all of us, okay? Yes, sir. Will you spell your last name for me, please? And he does. Back in 2023, where were you employed? 2023, Westville Correctional Facility. And is that part of the Indiana Department of Corrections? Yes, sir. And was Richard Allen a person that was being held at your facility at Westville? He was. And where within your facility was he being held? A pod, A1107. Was he in a cell by himself? He was. And can you give me the dimensions of the cell that he was being held in? I believe it's 12 by 8. And how does that size relate to the sizes of cells in that pod? They're all the same size cell, sir. And so he was in the same size cell as other people within that unit. Is that correct? That is correct. What is the cell referred to as, or does the cell have a name? The cell he was in was referred to as an observation cell. And why was he in that cell? Typically, a person would be in an observation cell if they were under any sort of mental health orders or self-unaliving watch. Did he have a bed in that cell? Yes, he did. Did he have a mattress? Yes. Did the bed have a mattress? Yes, it does. Was that mattress different from the mattresses issued to other individuals within your facility? No, sir. Did he have a bed frame for the mattress? Yes. And where is that bed frame located? It was bolted to the floor. And why is it bolted to the floor? So a person can't go under the bed if they're on some kind of self-unaliving watch. We have a constant observation. And was there time when Richard Allen was in your facility that he was on this self-unaliving watch? Yes, sir. Was there time that he was in your facility that he wasn't on this self-unaliving watch? Yes, sir. Okay. Was the defendant allowed to shower? He was. How many times a week? I believe 3 times a week. Is that different than other individuals in your facility? No, sir. Did he have a toilet in the cell? He did. Was he provided clothing? He was. How many sets of clothing? I believe 3 sets. Is that different than any other individuals in your facility? No, sir. Was he required to wear that clothing while it was soiled or dirty? No, sir. Did he have an opportunity to have that clothing cleaned? 3 times a week, sir. Did he have access to an electronic tablet? He did, 2 of them. And what could he do with that electronic tablet, or what capabilities did that tablet have? He could download some apps, listen to music, other commissary, make phone calls. Did he have recreational time? He did. When did he have recreational time? I believe Rex offered 5 times a week. So you get you get rec 5 times a week, but you can only shower 3? That makes no sense. I'm sorry, but that place has to stink to high heavens. It's a bunch of stinky men that get a bunch of rec time but no showers. Wow. Okay. And was that different than other individuals within your facility? No, sir. Was he allowed the same amount of rec time as other individuals in your facility? Yes, sir. Was he seen by medical personnel on a regular basis? Daily. He was on self-unaliving watch, and Dr. Walla is going to come into the picture here shortly. We're going to hear from her soon, too. So, was he seen by mental health professionals as well? Yes, sir. And did the medical personnel and mental health personnel keep you updated on his mental health and his physical well being? They did. Was he afforded face to face visits with family members? I believe on at least two occasions he was. He was arrested at the end of 2022. His trial didn't take place until the end of 2024, 2 years later. So he was only allowed to visit his family twice while he was there. Were other individuals within that unit afforded face to face visits? No, sir. Was he allowed visits with his attorney? He was. But the problem is, you kept him in there for an indefinite amount of time, and no person is supposed to be in solitary for more than 15 days. It can make anyone go crazy after 15 days. Like, really go crazy. This poor man spent months in solitary because they were supposedly watching him and it wasn't safe for him to be with the rest of the public. Well, then put him in a jail, and like a county jail, and not a prison, which is where he was. And pretrial detainees are not supposed to go to prison. They're supposed to be held in county until and when and if they get convicted, then they get moved to the prison. So that's your problem. You kept him in a prison, but then they use that as a crutch, like, well, we can't move him because it's dangerous for him to be out with the rest of the people. Well, you put him in there, so ugh. And they tried. The defense team tried multiple times to get him out of there. He was in under safekeeping order. Remember all of that? Anyways, so was he afforded face to face on two occasions? The however many years he was at Westville, he got to see his family twice. Were other individuals allowed to see people face to face? No, sir. Was he allowed visits with his attorney? He was. During the time that he was in that unit, was he were the other inmates assigned to his cell to observe him? Yes, sir. And why is that done? They were self-unaliving companions to document behavior. And what is the role of a self-unaliving companion? Just to document behavior. So he's in solitary, but constantly being watched by not just officials at the prison, but inmates also, which is bizarre. At some point, was that changed from inmates to correctional officers? It was. Tell me why that happened. I changed them to correctional officers for more privacy when he got his legal mail. Yeah, right. You wanted them to be spying on him and reading through his legal mail while he was all doped up on whatever Halidol and whatever else Dr. Walla had him on against his will. How often did you observe Richard Allen? For the first few months, I'd say almost daily, but at least a few times a week. And when he first came to your facility, what was his behavior like? He was quiet for the first month or so. At some point, did his behavior change? It did. Can you tell me about that? It changed the day he got his legal mail. I don't know how many pages it was, but his behavior started becoming erratic the day he got that. What do pages have to do with anything? And tell me what you mean by erratic. Ripping up the legal mail, washing his face in the toilet, defecating in his cell because he was doped up on Halidol, which are um, what's the word I'm looking for? Hallucinogenic in nature. So he ripped up legal mail, washed his face with the toilet, and would defecate in his cell. And is it at that point that you changed his companion from inmates to correctional officers? Correct. During this time, would you continue to see him on a regular basis? I saw him a few times weekly. Would he request for you to come talk to him? Sometimes he did, yes. During the time that you observed him, would you ever initiate conversations with him? No. During the times that you had conversations with him, what would he say to you? Sometimes he would confess to all he did, or sometimes he would ask for a chaplain, and sometimes he would ask for a Bible. I think he told me his tablet wasn't working, but the conversations were very limited. The times he would confess to you, do you know how many times he confessed to you? At least twice in person in a few notes or requests for interviews that he wrote. I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 292. Can you just tell me what that is? That's a request for interview that I received on 3/5. Tell me about. This is a request for interview from this is a request for interview form that you've seen before? Yes. And this is the form used at your facility? Correct. And when is this form used? Well, for what purpose? Anytime they want to have communication with somebody, whenever it is a counselor or myself. When you say they, who do you mean? Counselor, unit team member, captain, major, deputy, wardens, myself, medical. Do you? Mental health. Sorry. No, go on. Do you recognize this request for interview form? I do. And who is requesting the request for interview form from? Richard Allen. And who is it addressed to? Warden. And were you the warden? I was. Mr. McLeland says, Judge, the state would move to admit what's been marked as State's Exhibit 292. Mr. Rosie says, no objection. The court says, all right, without objection, 292 is admitted. Mr. McLeland says, and would ask permission of the court to be able to publish to the jury, please. The court says, you may. The witness says, you want me to read it? Not yet, says Mr. McLeland. It's published, and then the court says, you may proceed, Mr. McLeland. Mr. McLeland says, thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Galipeau, when did you receive this request for interview? March 5th, 2023. And again, you said it's from Richard Allen? Correct. And can you read that to the jury, please? It said, I'm ready to officially confess for killing Abby Williams and Libby German. I hope I get this opportunity to tell the family. Sorry. When you received that, and if you remember, I showed this on my channel when uh, this exhibit originally came out that day of the trial. It it was written in like this really erratic format, like part of the sentence was over here, and then another part of the sentence was over here, and words were really big and some were really small. It just didn't, and that's not his normal handwriting. So I think he was under some kind of drugs, perhaps, and maybe being coerced to write that letter by someone. Maybe Dr. Walla, perhaps, or maybe someone who worked there and was trying to get him to confess. One of the correctional officers. I don't know, but somebody. I think somebody made him write that. When you received this request, what did you do? I gave it to Internal Affairs. Did you go down and see Mr. Allen? No. Were there other times that he admitted to you? Yes. Were there times that he had apologized to you for what he had done? Yes. Did he give you any other details about what he had done besides, I confessed to killing Abby and Libby? I believe he mentioned something about when he worked at CVS with a box cutter that he had disposed of. So Galipeau tries to throw the box cutter on Richard Allen. And we now know from the Delphi Odin report that the people from the Franks memo, all those original suspects whose testimony or their interviews originally got erased by law enforcement, they made their own primitive knives because of their Odinist religion and stuff. They would make like they thought they were Vikings. It's basically what you think you are when you're Odinist, and you think Odin is God, and you think everything is nature and God related, spirit related. It's very, I don't know. I don't claim to know it all, but it's a weird thing. And it's basically a white supremacist group that's masking or parading as like a social club. I don't know. Social club slash religion. Do you recall how he disposed of his box cutter in a dumpster at CVS? Oh, really? You disposed your box cutter where you work, that you use for work, you disposed of it at work. I mean, this is not really earth-shattering stuff here. They're not even creative in their lies. And did he mention how he used that box cutter or what he used it for? No, sir. So he just happens to throw in the word box cutter at some point in time. During that time, did you have that information that he was also admitting to other people? I did. What information did you have? Just what was on the door sheets. And what information was that? Judge, I'm going to object to no firsthand knowledge and hearsay. The court says hearsay. Mr. McLeland says, I'll move on, Judge. It's fine. The court says sustained. Mr. Rosie says, thank you. Mr. McLeland continues, after he made these admissions, was he treated any differently by your facility? No, sir. Was he still given the same treatment in terms of recreational time and shower time? Yes, sir. Was he still given the same tablet access? He was. Were you able to observe Richard Allen while he was at your facility? Yes, sir. And is Richard Allen here in the courtroom today? He is. Can you describe what he's wearing, please? Looks like khakis and a flannel type shirt. Is he sitting to my right? Your left? My right. Oh, yes. Both rights. Sorry. Mr. McLuhan says, Judge, will you let the record reflect that the witness identified Richard Allen? The court says the record will so reflect. I don't have any other questions, Judge. Thank you. Mr. Rosie, says the court. So now we have cross-examination of the warden here by Mr. Rosie. Nice seeing you again, Warden. Nice seeing you. So, Westville Correctional Facility, let me ask you this first. You were the warden at Westville back in November of 2022 when Mr. Allen showed up at the doorstep, right? I believe it was October. Yes. October, late October, early November. We're on the same page? Right. And so you were running the facility, right? Correct. The buck stopped with you, so to speak. Hope so. All right. And he landed at your facility as the result of a safekeeping order that was issued by a judge in this county, right? Correct. And that safekeeping order was an order that you were familiar with generally. You understood what a safekeeping order was. Correct. And in this particular case, that safekeeping order resulted in the DOC essentially taking custody of Mr. Allen while his case was pending, right? Yes, sir. As opposed to you being in charge of somebody who's already been convicted. Correct. Big difference, right? Sure. And your primary job as the warden of the prison where the safekeeper, Mr. Allen, was located, was to ensure his safety and security while he was waiting trial. Correct. And to the extent that didn't happen falls on you, right? Correct. I see where you're going with this. And Westville Correctional Facility is a medium security facility, right? minimum to maximum. Okay. That's typically how it's classified, at least by the state, right? Sure. And in that facility, would you tell me maybe 2,000 or 3,000 offenders in total? About 3,000. Okay. And those offenders in that facility have various types of felony convictions, right? Correct. Murder? Sure. Grape? Yes. Arson? Yes. Robbery? Yes. We could go through the whole list, right? Yes, we could. The worst of the worst, right? All convicted, yes. Okay, and that facility actually has a maximum security unit within the medium max prison. Correct. And we've talked about that in with different acronyms, but I think you called it MCC. Correct. I refer to it as the WCU. Is that the same? Same thing. Okay, and there's a couple of those maximum security units around the state, right? Correct. One of those is down in Wabash Valley. Correct. And one of them is, I think, is in Pendleton. Yes. And then, of course, there was one in Miami County too, maybe. Not that I'm aware of, no. Okay. And then up at Westville? Correct. All right. And you would generally agree with me that is quite an outdated facility at this point. Mr. McLeland says, Judge, I'm going to object to relevance. Mr. Rosie says, it goes to the environmental conditions at the prison which he was responsible for pursuant to the safekeeping order. The court says, well, let's limit it to the time frame then. Yeah, well, the witness says the maximum security building was built, I believe, in 1996, making it one of the newest facilities in the Department of Correction. Okay, but that facility's gonna be out of use here in a few months, isn't it? The general population side of the facility, yeah, in a few years, probably. They're shutting it down and they're building a brand new prison right next to it. Right. Why? You're just wasting, like, what is anybody going to do with the other prison then? Just sits there and wastes away? Like, why? Why do you need a new one? Right. Okay. And those conditions there are just no longer suitable for housing offenders in general, are they? They're suitable. Okay. Mr. Rosie says, may I approach, Judge? You may. I'm going to hand you what I've marked as Defendant's Exhibit QQ. Just take a look at that, if you would, and I'll ask a few questions about it. Let me know when you're through with that. I'm fine, sir. Did you get a chance to look at that? Yes. Okay, does that look like an overhead view of Westville Correctional Facility? It does. And just to kind of orient you here, would you agree with me that the view at the top of the image, there is basically the existing facility, and then kind of the bottom half would be the new facility that's being constructed? It looks like it, yes. Okay. Does it generally mimic the conditions that you're familiar with up at Westville? It does. I'd move to admit QQ. Mr. McGleeland says, I don't see the relevance, Judge, but I have no objection. The court says, okay, without objection, then QQ is admitted. If you don't see the relevance, but you don't have an objection, do you need to say that? Or can you just say, no objection? You can just think things and not say them out loud. But okay. Mr. Rosie says, thank you. May I publish, Judge? You may. The court says you may proceed, Mr. Rosie. Thank you, Judge. Mr. Galipeau, just to kind of orient the jury about the location where Mr. Allen was housed, would you agree with me that basically this top half here is the existing Westville Correctional Facility? Yes, sir. I would blow this up if I could. I'm sorry. This is the best we could do with the technology. It's okay. Can you see it okay? I can. Do you want me to give you this? No, I'm good. I can see it. And do you generally agree with me that if you were going to get into this prison, you were kind of coming into the administration building here at the top left? Correct. You go through some metal detectors and a razor wire fence right in this area, right? Right. And then basically, if I recall from being up there, once you get inside the facility here, you got to go to the backgrounds, which is the WCU unit or the maximum security unit. That is correct. So it's this kind of pod up here on the top of the screen that has the 5 different, I don't know if those are octagons or whatever shape those are, right? 4 pods, yes. But before you get into that, this particular area, there's actually another razor wire fence that you've got to go through. 2 fences, I think, maybe. Correct. And then you're essentially at the doorstep of the WCC, and then you got to get inside, which is obviously secure, right? Correct. So it's kind of a prison within a prison. Is that a fair way of describing it? It used to be. And that unit, the WCCU or WCU, I should say, is the most secure unit of the state of Indiana. It's one of them. One of 3, right? Yes. We've talked about the other 2, one in Pendleton and one in Wabash Valley. Sure, you don't get any more secure than that. It's secure. Really secure? It's pretty good. Okay. And most of the felons, if not the majority of them that are in there for conduct violations, aren't they? Majority, yes. He's building to something. I'm not sure what exactly, but he's building. It's a place where people go, where you sent people in the DOC. I think his big point is that he didn't belong there in the first place. It's a place where people go, where you sent people in the DOC to be punished if they do things wrong, isn't it? I wouldn't say punished, but yes, they're convicted. Okay, and we've talked about this kind of recently. I suggested to you that they refer to this as the whole, and you said, yeah, in the Hollywood movies they do, right? I don't recall that. Really? You don't recall that conversation? Okay, you don't recall us talking about that. No. Do you want me to refresh your memory, or do you believe that that's true? I mean, we can. I'm not denying it. I said I don't remember. Okay, all right. And if someone breaks the rules in that facility, the WC or the MCC facility, you're out of options. Like, that's the only place you can send them, right? Yes, we're out of options, but it's the only, we can transfer them to another secure facility just like it. Sure. Okay. And you said earlier, when Mr. McLeland was questioning you, you have a few cells in there that you use for self-unaliving watch. Is that right? 4 of them. So there's just to help the jury here, there's 4 pods in there. A pod is where A1107 is, where Rick stayed, right? Correct. And then there's B pod, C pod, and D pod. Correct. Okay, and so each of those pods, if I recall, have about 50 to 60 units or cells in them. 55. Okay, and there's one designated pod in each unit, which is a self-unaliving pod. One designated cell in each pod. Yes. So a self-unaliving cell, and that's Rick was in the A pod, self-unaliving cell. Correct. Okay, and when you put in a normal circumstance, when you place an offender in one of those cells, the self-unaliving cell, they're typically in there for very short periods of time. Correct. You told me maybe a day or up to a week. Possibly, yes. But for the most part, the other 54 cells are used for punishment to house people that are dangerous. Used to segregate them, correct. Okay, because they've committed violations in the prison system. Yes, sir. In general population. And the only difference in terms of the inside of the cell, as I understand it, between the other 54 cells in this pod and the cell is the bed. And the camera. Okay, yeah. Thank you for reminding me of that. That's pretty important. The bed in the self-unaliving cell, as you said, is bolted to the floor, the bed frame. Correct. Okay. We'll see it on the video at some point. But you mentioned that the mattresses are all the same as they are in the 54 units, right? Correct. They're 4 or 5 inch thick little mattresses, right? Assuming, yeah. I don't know the thickness of it, but yeah. You don't know what 4 or 5 inches looks like? But in this case, Rick Allen's bed was, or a mattress, was laid on top of a metal slab that's bolted to the floor. Correct. A couple inches off the floor. Yes. It's basically on the floor, right? Well, it's a couple inches off the floor. Yes. Okay. Now you've been in the DOC, as I understand it, you were in the DOC, I correct myself when we last spoke, but for 28 years? Yes. And you were the warden at Westville for 5 years leading up to Rick's detention. Correct. You were not aware of any other circumstances where someone who was a presumed innocent detainee was held in solitary confinement in that prison, are you? No, not that I had. No. And he was held there for over a year, wasn't he? Yes, sir. 13 months. Correct. That's insane. You're not supposed to go more than 15 days, and yet 13 months, man. I can't even imagine that. You're not aware of any other unit in the state similar to that where a partial detainee was housed like Mr. Allen, are you? Not that I'm aware of. But you applied all the same rules with with Rick. He calls him Rick by his first name, as you applied with these other offenders. Correct. You made that perfectly clear earlier, right? Yes, sir. Equal treatment? Yes, sir. But all those other people had been convicted of crimes, hadn't they? That is correct. Heinous crimes. Mr. McLean says, Judge, this has been asked and answered. Sustained. I'll withdraw. We talked about self-unaliving watch. Do you remember that? I do. You said Rick was on self-unaliving watch during a part of his stay. Most of his stay. Okay. And in fact, when he showed up, he was on self-unaliving watch immediately, wasn't he? He came to us on self-unaliving watch. And there was no information that suggested he was a threat to anybody, was he? I'm unaware of the mental health notes. Okay, well, would you defer to his psychologist, Dr. Walla, in that regard? Would she be the better person or be in a better position to make those calls? She would. Okay, but he was placed on self-unaliving watch immediately. Correct. He came in on self-unaliving watch. I'm sorry? He came to us on self-unaliving watch from another psychologist. Do you know where he came from? I don't. You ever bother to look at his chart to see where it came from? I haven't. You ever bother to look at his chart to see anything about his history? No, sir. Like, hey, has this guy even ever been to prison before? I don't look at histories, sir. We have 3,000 inmates. I don't look at histories. Don't you care, though, that like one of the most high profile cases ever in your state occurred and you have a pretrial detainee there? Wouldn't you care about that at all? Even if it wasn't a high profile case, you have a pretrial detainee there. You should care a little. But he doesn't, obviously. Well, but this guy was different, right? Didn't even know him. Okay, but he was a safekeeper. Correct. And you've never heard of a safekeeper being in that pod in 28 years, right? Not in that pod, no, sir. But you didn't think, hey, I'm going to go look at his file because this is a little unusual? No, sir. Okay. So he gets placed on self-unaliving watch, and you put him in a cell with his bed 4 inches or 2 to 4 inches from the floor and a camera, right? Correct. Mr. McClellan says, Judge, objection, asked and answered. We've covered this already. Sustained. There was a camera in the room. Yes, there was. Judge, objection again. That was asked and answered. We've already covered this. Sustained. Seriously. Tell the jury where the camera's located. It's located on the ceiling, I believe in the right-hand side up top, out of reach. It's 24 hours a day he's on film, right? Yes, sir. And there's no privacy in that cell whatsoever, is there? Not a lot. There's a door with a window, right? Correct. A metal door. Yes, sir. And there's a video camera, as you mentioned. There's a toilet in that cell. There is. 8 by 12, right? 12 by 8, yes. Okay. In fact, you told me it might be 8.5 by 12.5. It was close. Little detail, right? Yep. And the lights are on in there, right? I mean, he has access to dim the lights. Okay, but there are lights on in there because it's a self-unaliving cell, right? Oh, there are, yeah. Okay, and you told me at one point that his window was damaged, right? The window to the outside? Damaged and replaced. And if I'm not mistaken, that window's just kind of narrow, a narrow slat, right? In the wall? I guess I'm going to object to this. Of course you are, Mr. McClelland, to the relevance of the size of the window. Mr. Rosie says, conditions in his cell, environmental conditions. Overruled, says the court. Do you agree with me? I agree it's a narrow window, yes. And, and outside of that window, he's just looking at a razor wire fence, right? I suppose, yes, sir. Okay. Now the toilet in his room is next to his bed, correct? It's to the right of it, yes. A couple feet from his head where he would lay, right? Yes, sir. A steel toilet. A what toilet? A steel toilet. Yes. A concrete cell. Yes. Metal door. Yes. Now, to contrast that, there's another side to this prison which is the general population, right? Yes. And in the general population, well, let me back up. Would you agree with me that in the WCU, these inmates cannot have any contact with other inmates outside of their cell? I mean, they can vocalize. Right, they can yell at each other through the doors. Sure. And they're not allowed to have any interactions with other inmates? Not physically, no. So Mr. Allen, for 13 months, was isolated basically in a space of his own. Yes, sir. No social interaction. Well, no physical interaction. Okay, well, so the social interaction is them yelling? Sure. Really? Because they were yelling child killer and horrible things at him? That's social interaction. Now, in general population, the inmates can have contact with each other. Yes, right? Compare and contrast Mr. Allen's circumstances. In general population, there's typical, I'd say, average sized dormitory. It's probably 80 inmates in an open style, military style barracks. So sometimes they have too much contact. Okay. They can sit down and talk to each other. Yes. Play cards? Yes. Watch TV together? Well, they can. Okay. They're able to move about freely most of the time. And they go to the bathroom in a separate room, right? Correct. They get to eat their meals together. Yes. Rick Allen got to eat through a hole in his door, didn't he? Well, it was delivered through the hole in his door, but it's called a cuff port, right? Correct. It's a little slit in the door where they stick the food in. Correct. And then he gets to take that food and sit on the ground and eat on his own bed, doesn't he? He can sit on his bed, yes. He's got no table in there, does he? No. I think at one point there might have been a cardboard box in there for his TV. Oh, he says for his TV. The question is, I think there might have been a cardboard box in there, and he says for his TV. Okay, and there's no desk in there? No. No chair in there? No. When the inmates in general population move around, they're not shackled or restrained, are they? Not unless they're in restrictive setting. Okay. But if they're in the general population in the dorm setting, no. They move freely, right? Correct. Move around the dorm freely? Okay. Now you mentioned earlier that Rick got wreck, right? He did. And I think you told me that you thought it was 4 days a week. Earlier you testified to five. I believe it's five. So lockdowns are Tuesdays and Sundays, I believe. So I believe five. You're the warden, don't you know? A couple days there, they're locked down altogether, right? Tuesdays. Okay. Maybe Thursdays as well? I don't recall. Okay. Possibly, though. And when the inmates in general population have rec, they get to go outside, don't they? Depending on the weather, yes. May I approach the TV here? The court says you may. Just to orient the jury at the top of this exhibit, let's just start at the top here on the top left quadrant. When you come into the facility on the left, you see this large structure right here. I do. Okay. And next to it, is this kind of a big yard or field? Correct. Is that a rec yard? No. Is there a basketball court there? Inside of our dorm, there is. Okay. Well, in this green space here to the left, there is, looks like a concrete slab or this colored slab. Maybe there is. There's a slab out there for our dorms, our level one offenders. Okay. It's hard to see. Okay. When they go out, to rec, right? Correct. Did Rick Allen ever get to go out there and go to rec? No. Like, dude, you should have at least given him rec by himself. No. Down here, as we came into the right, there's another green space. So you see just there to the right? I do. Is that another rec area? No. Okay, what is it? I believe that it's a grass field. There's no tower there. Okay. And then moving kind of around to the bottom here, kind of the bottom top half of the photo here, there's another dorm, right? It looks like our something dorm. I swear to God, this person has so many inaudibles in their transcript. I've never seen so many. Okay. And they've got a rec yard over here, just off the northeast corner of that. It's not used no more. That's not correct English. It's an old rec yard. It ever was? Years ago. Rick Allen didn't get to use any of that space, right? No. And then down here on the bottom, right, as we moved around, there's a baseball diamond right here. Looks like it. And that's a rec area. Yes, sir. Did Rick Allen get to use that space? No. Then moving up here, there's another large grass area. Is that another rec area? I don't believe it's just a large, or I believe it's just a large grass area. It looks like it might have a little bit of a track or around it or walkways. Is that what you recall or not? I don't recall a rec area outside there, no. Did Rick Allen get to use any of that? No. Then coming up, there's another ball diamond, right? That's the GSE. Okay. And rec area where these offenders go. Correct. Rick Allen get to use any of that? No. What about the green spot here just below the WCU? Is that a rec area? I don't believe so, no. Rick Allen's rec area was right here in this little quadrant here at the WCU, right? Correct. And in fact, he got to go to rec in a room that was about 10 by 5, which is not much, or 10 by 15, which isn't much bigger than the cell he was in. He says, I don't know the dimension of the room. Well, there's indoor and outdoor rec, and okay. And so, do you recall telling me that one of the rooms, the rec room that he was in was 10 by 15? I'm sure that's accurate. I'm sorry? That's probably outside rec, the inside recs. You think that's accurate? Probably. Okay, and when you say outside rec, there's still a roof over this facility, isn't there? Outside rec, there's a screen so you can get fresh air. Yeah, so it's kind of like a cage, right? I mean, it's an outdoor rec area. Okay. Well, these walls on all sides, except, well, walls on all the sides, isn't there? It's a prison. I understand it's a prison. Yes. A place where you put people who are convicted of crimes. Potentially. Is that it? Potentially. Okay. Or safekeepers. So four walls, right? Correct. And a screen over it? Yes. Is it fair for me to call that a cage? I mean, I refer to it as a rec area. So an indoor rec. Correct. How big's that space? I'm not sure. It's probably double the size of the outdoor rec. Okay. And it's right here in the WCU, right? Correct. So he just basically comes out of his cell and walks down the hallway. Is that correct? And in neither one of those, sorry, that is correct, he says. And in neither one of those, do they get to socialize with anybody? Not physically. Okay. There's a pull up bar, I think you said, in one of those rec rooms. There's a pull up bar. The outdoors got a basketball net, and I believe the indoor rec, we put ellipticals in there as well. Okay. And he gets to go in there about 4 or 5 hours a week? Correct, if he chooses. That's if he's not on self-unaliving watch. Correct. Because when you're on self-unaliving watch, you get your rec restricted, don't you? Most of the time, yes. And there's no card games to be played by him, is there? No. No board games, right? No. He's not even allowed to have playing cards in his cell, is he? There's games on the tablet, but not playing cards. Correct. You said he got some movies on his tablet, right? He could. He's got to pay for those? Yes, sir. Music, you got to pay for that? Correct. He gets some phone calls? He does. In his cell, right? Yes. And those are recorded, aren't they? Not to attorneys. Well, but the other calls are. Yes. He can't talk to his wife in private, can he? They're recorded. Right. GTL is the company that does that for you, that does the recordings for you. Correct. And so he also has a tablet that he can send messages on, right? I believe so, yes. Those are monitored as well, aren't they? Yes. No privacy there. Limited. And there were times when he didn't have a tablet, weren't there? When he broke his, yes. And you said he could have been without a tablet for a month or more on occasion? He could have. And in fact, at one point, GTL was really behind on those tablets, weren't they? For the general pop, they were. Yeah, and I understand you said that. When he broke the first one, or it broke, you gave him one right away to replace it, didn't you? Pretty quick, yes. But that was early on, wasn't it? That was after he broke his tablet. Okay, but there were other times where he went without a tablet because of his backlog. No. Okay, the mental health order, when he was on the mental health order, would he also be monitored when he went and took a shower? Yes. So he can't even take a shower in private. Jeez, Lou. And so you said earlier that the rec time when he was on self-unaliving watch was reduced, right? Correct. And basically because he's under constant observation, correct? And in a kimono gown. He's in a specific kind of clothing, looks like a kimono gown, apparently, because that's the best thing, I guess, that they think is for anyone that might be wanting to take their own life, that you can't do it with the kimono gown for some reason. Okay, I was just going to get to that. I appreciate you transitioning for me. You're welcome. One of the real differences when you're on self-unaliving watch is that your clothing circumstances change too, doesn't it? Depending on what level. On constant, yes. So the level he was on, it changed, didn't it? He was on constant. And constant observation, right? Correct. And so when you're on constant observation, you don't get your regular prison clothes, do you? That is correct. You guys issue a kimono or a smock. Is that what they call it? Yes, sir. And basically, it's just a gown that goes over the top of the person, the inmate, right? It's a gown, and yeah, it covers from the shoulders to below his knees. And it's got some straps on the sides that you kind of hook together. Is that right? I believe so. Okay, and so when someone's on this self-unaliving watch, their restrictions actually tighten up, don't they? Yes. You have less of everything? You do. Now, you mentioned visitation. You thought Rick got 2 visits, right? At least 2 that I recall. And you recall one of those visits at least that we were there, Mr. Baldwin and I, on several, yeah, yes, 2 or 3. Okay, well, let me clarify. There was a visitation that occurred with Mr. Allen's family, right? I believe 2. That was his wife? Correct. Okay, and that happened in a different building within Westville, right? Yes, sir. And Mr. Baldwin and I were there. Yes, sir. He was transported down there by several guards. Correct. And he was fully shackled, right? Until we got there. So we've talked about this before, haven't we? We have. Handcuffs during transport. Yes. I'm hot. I need the fan on. Hold on. I'm getting hot flashes still. I think I've got POTS, which is not fun. All right. During transport, yes. Leg shackles? Yes, sir. Judge, I'll object. This has been asked and answered. He said he was fully shackled. Sustained. Well, we haven't talked about the nature of the restraints. Sustained. Tell the jury what restraints he had on him. Mr. McLellan says, Judge, again, I'm going to object. It's been asked and answered. He was fully shackled. Sustained. Really? I think that we're entitled to tell them what that means, says Mr. Rosie. The court says that's not what you asked. Mr. Rosie says, I asked him to explain to the jury how he was restrained. That's the question, says the court. Mr. Rosie says, I'm sorry, ma'am. The court says, that is not the question that you asked. Would you explain to the jury what restrained means in this circumstance? Sure. They're restrained with hand restraints and leg irons and a transportation lead. Hand restraints, leg irons, and a transportation lead. Okay. Is there a belly chain also? Yes. That's part of that? Yes. Okay. And then with those hand restraints, is there a box that goes over them? Yes. Further secures them? So you can tamper with it, correct. Okay. And you said a lead? A lead. How have I referred to that in the past? I refer to it as a lead. What did I say? I believe you said a dog leash. Very similar, though, isn't it? No. I think this guy's lying. He says, okay, it's nylon, strap with a hook on the end, isn't it? Mr. McLellan says, Judge, I'm going to object. This has been asked and answered. No, it hasn't. Sustained. And so that visit, you had guards stand by him while he was visiting with his wife, didn't you? Correct. We've talked about this before. They were a couple feet away from him during the visit. He was on constant watch, right? He was. And there's no privacy in any of that, was there? He had a visit. That's not the question. There wasn't any privacy, was there? I mean, all visits are recorded. All right. General Pop 2, or I'm sorry, he said, and General Pop 2. And you said if he stood up during that visit, the visit would be terminated? Right. With anybody? Yep. He was treated just like anybody else? Better. Okay, so no food or snacks during the visit? Not for anybody. If he'd have went to the bathroom, his visit would have been terminated? That's policy. No water for him? Correct. Water would terminate his visit? Correct. No water for his wife? Correct. Had to terminate the visit if that happened, right? Correct. Water fountain right next to him the whole time, wasn't there? Yes, sir. Bunch of vending machines right behind us? Correct. Phone calls? You said earlier those phone calls are monitored unless they're attorney phone calls. You said, right? Correct. How do they determine which ones are attorney calls and which ones aren't? I think he flags them as attorneys. Do you know that? Do I know that? Yeah. No. Okay, so you're just guessing, right? I'm not guessing. I mean, attorney calls are not recorded. I don't know how he did it, but no, that's not a guess. Is there any form of communication is there any form of communication from that cell to the outside world other than those attorney calls that's not monitored? Is there any sort of communication? Mail. From inside Richard Allen's cell to the outside world other than where he may flag us? Mail. That's not monitored? Mail. You don't monitor the mail? They scan it. Well, we took some discovery up there in March, didn't we? I don't recall. You didn't know that? Know what? That we took a box of discovery up there to give him. Okay. And it took 2 weeks for them to get it to him because they had to sort through the box. Did you know that? I don't recall. Okay. I just recall the legal mail coming in. They actually take the documents that get sent to these people and they check the documents for trace evidence of drugs, don't they? Not on his circumstance. The legal mail was sent in, and I believe it was roughly 400 to 500 pages. I asked, because we copy all legal mail, I asked if the legal mail was to be copied, and they said no, just give him the original, so that's what I did. So his legal mail was not copied. Okay, and it took some time to get through that process, didn't it? Excuse me? It took some time to get through all that process, didn't it? It was a lot of pages. Well, we even had restrictions when we went to visit him, didn't we? Of course. At first, we were allowed to take our phones in there, right? Mr. McLeland says, Judge, I'm going to object. And the witness just answers correct. And Mr. McLeland says, none of this is relevant. Mr. Rosie says, Judge, it's all relevant because it has a tendency to prove that the conditions that this man endured for 13 months impacted his mental health. The court says, how is whether you can bring in a phone relevant to that specific issue? It's relevant because it impacted our ability to communicate with him and represent him in an effective way. Sustained. Seriously, Judge? The rules changed when you came up there, didn't they? Or the rules changed when we were coming up there, didn't they? Mr. McClelland says, Judge, I'm going to object again. I don't know what the relevance is. I'll move on. The court says, thank you. You taped Richard Allen's meeting with his lawyers, didn't you? I had them taped, yes. Okay, you had a camcorder up there at the prison, right? Yes. And when we met with him, you had an officer holding that camcorder taping our visits with him from outside the room. Unfortunately, yes. All right. You took us in a specific room and you made him sit in a specific chair, didn't you? Yes. We made a visitation room for him, facing the camera. Correct. So the camera focused on him at all times while we were talking to him about his case. Judge, objection, asked and answered, sustained. Let's talk about the use of force. That's something that occurs from time to time at WCU, doesn't it? Everywhere in prison, unfortunately. Okay. And there was never a time where Rick was any meaningful threat to staff, was there? I don't clarify the meaningful threat where he was a threat to the physical safety. Well, if you don't follow orders, you can be a threat. Yes. Okay, but there was never a time when Rick exhibited any of those behaviors, was there? Yes, there was. Okay, well, when was it? I believe it was twice we had to use force on him. Ironically, both after attorney visits. Seriously? So now you're going to blame it on the attorneys. Okay. When he refused to take his hands out of the cuff port. Yeah. He was inside of his 8 by 12 cell? Correct. With the door locked? Correct. And he wouldn't move his hands from the cuff port, right? So we could not secure the door, correct? Right. So you gave him a zap of electricity twice, didn't you? After several times to tell him to put his hands back in. A real threat, wasn't he? Non-compliant, yes. Because if you're non-compliant enough, that's how you get treated, isn't it? The cuff ports need to be closed for safety reasons, yes. He was treated just like all other convicted felons, wasn't he? He was treated better. Now, Mr. McLeland asked you about these inmates that would sit at his door. You're familiar with that program? Yes. Call them companions, right? Self-unaliving companions, yes. It's part of some program at the prison where people can participate and get some credit for it, right? I don't know about credit, but they get paid for it, yes. Okay, and so there's some incentive for these inmates to be part of this companion program. Sure. And you don't see a problem with that? And basically, the companion is required to sit at the door of whatever or whoever it is that they are monitoring. In this case, Mr. Allen, correct? Basically, they do shifts. They do what? They do shifts, right? Yes. And they're given a pen and some paper. Correct. And they're basically asked to make observations and document those in writing. Correct. What he's saying. Yes. How he's acting. Yes. And the times that those things are going on, right? Yes. Could be as frequent as every 5 minutes you might report on somebody's behaviors. Yes. And that was the case here. Correct. And these companions, unfortunately, are convicted felons, right? They are. And some of them are convicted of crimes of dishonesty. I assume so. And at some point, you testified earlier you pulled the companions, didn't you? I did. The rules of the companion program rules, prohibit them from actually talking with the offenders, don't they? Well, we'd hope that happens. But they're not supposed to talk to them, right? They're not counselors, no. All right. And they're certainly not supposed to take anything that goes on as any information that they obtain from their companionship and communicate that to anybody else, are they? We would hope not. But that happened here, didn't it? I'm sure it did. You had some breaches, didn't you? Judge, I'm going to object to the relevance of this. Shut up, McClelland. Just shut up. Mr. Rosie says, yeah, the relevance is that there was a safekeeping order in place. He was responsible for carrying that out to ensure his safety and security, and that was breached by these companions who spread this information all over. Overruled. I'm surprised she allowed it in. So that's what happened, didn't it? Judge, I'm going to object again unless Mr. Rosie can prove how this how this somehow affected Mr. Allen's safekeeping or his mental health, or had any, or that even Mr. Allen knew about that. I don't see how this is even relevant. Sustained, she says. Are you effing kidding me, woman? You had problems with the companions, didn't you? Not really, no. Well, you removed them, didn't you? I removed them when he got his legal mail for his protection. Well, let's talk about that and privacy. You don't have any idea what was in that legal mail, do you? Nor did I want to. All right. You don't even know what he read, do you? No. Okay. You just know he got legal mail and it happened to be around the same time that you were talking about these other things. The same day. April 3rd, right? I don't know. It was the same day, though. Some of those companions documented behaviors of the log sheets. Correct. And those log sheets are then directed. There's a process that for those log sheets getting to the administrators, right? Going to the mental health, yes. They don't just take them back to their cells at this point, is my point. No. And that's what happened in this case. They were all funneled to mental health? Yes. And those records ultimately were turned over to the state, weren't they? Correct. Now, the guards that you have replaced these companions with guards at one point, correct? Yes. And those guards don't have any formal mental health training, do they? No. And you mentioned earlier there was reference to this 292, this letter, Exhibit 292, this letter that was directed to you, right? Yes. And this letter came about the time he got this legal mail, didn't he? I don't recall. I put a date on the letter. Okay. I believe it was March. Okay. It was the about the time he started acting up, right? Fair enough. So you know what I'm talking about, right? Yes. When it started getting pretty bad in the cell. He started making it bad, yes. Okay, well, the feces, all that stuff, right? Right. Did you generate any other document? We'll strike that. Did you generate a report that reflects your receipt of this letter? I believe I turned over a few to internal affairs. I'm not sure when. So you think you prepared a report, or you're not sure? Did I prepare a report? Yeah, a report. No, if I got a request from him, we got to turn it over. I don't know what you mean by prepare a report. Well, you didn't generate any kind of incident report that, hey, I got a letter from Rick Allen. No. Anything like that? No, it's very common to get those. And you said that there are other times where he said things to you that were incriminating? Yes. You didn't prepare any reports with regard to any of those either, did you? No. There's not any documentation other than your word here today that those things occurred, are there? Objection asked and answered. Sustained. Mr. Rosie says, I'm sorry. Sustained. So no reports, right? Again, Judge, the objection was asked and answered. Sustained. He started engaging in these bizarre behaviors in April, right? 2022 or 2023. I don't remember the exact date, but I remember when they occurred. Yes. So that sounds about right. Sounds about right. Now, these statements that you were talking about a minute ago, most of these occurred at his cell door, right? Correct. And I think you told me that the only real proof of those existing, other than you testifying, is things that other inmates or guards may have written in their log sheets? Correct. And at some point you told me, well, strike that. Have you ever read a log sheet where someone was recording incriminating statements from an inmate? No, I typically wouldn't get log sheets. Well, this was a first? Yes. Law enforcement was coming up to the prison and meeting with your guards while this was going on, weren't they? I don't recall. Do you ever remember a situation where law enforcement was interested in what someone was doing, an inmate at that prison, that had to do with Mr. Allen? Yeah, I don't recall, no. Or any other inmates in his situation. We've had law enforcement come in and talk to staff for various reasons, but I don't remember any law enforcement talking to staff for Richard Allen reasons. But you told me that police recall, or I'm sorry, but you told me that you don't recall any situation where law enforcement had come up there because someone was confessing to something, right? Say that again? You told me that you didn't recall a situation in the past, and I still don't, where law enforcement was coming up there because somebody was confessing to something. Correct. In terms of his overall state of mental health while at the DOC, especially Westville, you would have to refer to his psychologist, wouldn't you? What do you mean, refer to him? Ms. Walla, Dr. Walla, would be in a better position to have an opinion about his mental health status. Oh, sure. You never talked to the Carroll County Sheriff about Mr. Allen's circumstances at the prison while he was there. Not that I recall. No one from the sheriff's office ever came to check on him. Not that I recall. Now, at some point after 13 months, Rick was moved, right? Yes. To Wabash Valley. Yes. And you knew that we were trying to get him out of there, didn't you? Yes. We've been here in court over it twice, haven't we? 3 times. Okay. And finally, that happened, didn't it? It did. I'll object to the line of questioning, says Mr. McLeland. I don't see what the relevance is, whether or not his attorneys were able to get him moved. I don't see the relevance. Sustained. So he was moved, and it wasn't your choice, right? It wasn't my choice. No, that's the relevance. In December of 2023, he just was gone one night, right? He was moved. And you were on his MDT team, weren't you? A what team? The MDT team, on the medical team. I would pop in, yeah. Okay, it's basically a team of 4 or 5 administrators and doctors that make decisions about inmates, right? I mean, correct. I'm not. And Rick had a team. I'm not assigned to that team. You're not? No, I mean, I'd pop in, but on occasion, but I'm not assigned to that team. You didn't know anything about why he got moved to Wabash Valley, right? No, even though you were the warden. That's right. You said, basically, it all happened over an email, didn't it? I'm not sure how it happened, but Westville moves, a lot of inmates. Did you ever? Every day. Sorry, go ahead. I said we move a lot of inmates every day. Did you ever follow up and get an explanation for why he was all of a sudden gone? I wasn't curious to. Really? Life in prison can be pretty tough on people, can't it? It's an adjustment, especially on one's mental health. Correct. And detaining somebody in the super secure unit like the WCU can be tougher, can't it? It's an adjustment. Major adjustment, right? Objection, again asked and answered. Sustained. Oh my God. Especially for someone who has never been to prison before, right? I don't know his history, but it's an adjustment, yes. Did you ever review any of the in-cell video in Mr. Allen's cell? I have. Okay. When did you do that? Why did I do that? When did you do that? I'm not sure. When an incident occurred in his cell, I would review it. Okay. You don't work for the DOC anymore, do you? Correct. You got fired, didn't you? I got let go. Oh, so he does not work at Westville anymore. He got canned. Why? I don't know. Objection. This is outside the scope of direct. Sustained. Judge, may I? The court says it's outside scope of direct. You were responsible for his safekeeping, weren't you? Yes. And that responsibility, you breached that responsibility, haven't you? I have breached that. I have breached that? Sorry, that's a question. I have breached that? Yes. How so, sir? By neglecting your duties. I did not neglect my duties. Okay, well, I asked you what happened to you, and you weren't honest with me, were you? About what? About your transfer. What about my transfer? You said you were laterally transferred to the girls' school, weren't you? Hmm, he lied. Judge, I'm going to object to the line of question. It's well outside the scope. The court says it is outside the scope. Mr. Rosie says, Judge 607, I'm entitled to impeach this witness through Rule 607. Bias, prejudice, his motive to misrepresent is all in question under Rule 607, and it's the state's or it's the defense's position that he has a motive to misrepresent the truth because it goes directly to his violating the safekeeping order which he was responsible for, and it impacted the man's safety and security, and that's why it's relevant. The court says the objection was that it's outside the scope of direct. Well, I think it's relevant because I understand that his objection, but it's not a proper objection. It's relevant because he talked about the safekeeping order and how the buck stops with him. The court says, I appreciate that, but I'm the one that decides if it's outside the scope, and it's outside the scope of direct. Mr. Rosie says, thank you. The court says, which is why I've sustained the objection. Thank you. I don't have any further questions. The court says, Mr. McLeland. Thank you, Judge. Now we've got some redirect. Let me write down the time stamp here. All right, so Mr. McLeland, redirect of this witness. Mr. Galipeau, may be an unfair question, but do you know about what time or what day he got when he first received legal mail? I don't. I want to say it was in the spring, maybe in March or April, possibly. Now, you said that Mr. Richard Allen was on a self-unaliving watch. Is that correct? Correct. During the time he was with you, why did you place him on, or why was he placed on self-unaliving watch? Dr. Walla put him on self-unaliving watch for a conversation that they've had that was private to me. So typically, I wouldn't be involved in those discussions or decisions. I would just follow the orders. And those were coming from his mental health care provider. Correct. And in general, why is someone placed on self-unaliving watch? What is the point of that? To keep them safe. Mr. Rosie talked about taping the attorney visits. When attorneys come to visit individuals at your facility, are those meetings taped? They are. Are the audio portions? Is there audio to those tapes? No. And then lastly, I don't believe that for one stinking second. I don't believe that there was not audio. And then lastly, on the door sheets, those are something used by the mental health providers. Is that correct? Yes, the door sheets go to the mental health provider so you can get updates and feedback. I don't have any other questions, Judge. Mr. Rosie. Now we've got some recross here. Earlier, you said he came in on self-unaliving watch, and now you're saying Dr. Walla put him on self-unaliving watch? He came in on a different self-unaliving order. Once we got him, we referred him within 7 hours, and he was continued on self-unaliving watch. And within your facility, the majority of time he was in there, he was up on self-unaliving watch, right? For a lengthy period, yes. Which meant he had less privileges than all the others. Correct. Well, didn't you say he had more? And Mr. McClelland asked you about the attorney visits being taped, and you said all visits are taped, right? Correct. Now, when the other attorneys come in, they go into a little room there when they walk in the door and they meet with the inmates or the clients in a room, like an attorney room with a window, glass, right? What facility are you talking about? At the WCU. You're the only attorney I've ever seen in there. Oh, so all the other attorneys' visits are didn't occur? No, I've never seen an attorney in there. Okay, all right. And when two lawyers did show up, put a video camera on us, and sat there and watched us visit with your client, didn't you? because that room doesn't have a camera. If it was in general population, those rooms are full of cameras. You also sat inmates at the door when we were meeting, or other guards at the door when we were meeting with our clients, didn't you? Well, you can't do constant watch, sir. All right, so no privacy, is there? No, when you're on self-unaliving watch. I have nothing further, Mr. Rosie says. The court says, does anybody on the jury have any questions for Mr. Galipeau? No response or indication from any jurors. Court says no. All right. Thank you, Mr. Galipeau. You may step down. The witness says you're welcome. The court says you may call your next witness, Mr. McLeland. And he's going to call some, I think these Ethan Drang might be the uh, yeah, he's a correction officer or something there. So the next people that we're going to hear from are other people that worked at Westville Correctional Facility, I believe. All right, so that is going to be it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know in the comments below what you think. Personally, I felt like the defense was really strong armed by the state's objections to not really be able to get into certain things, and um that's unfortunate. And there was some spicy moments, a little bit of spice between Judge Gull and Rosie there about, well, Judge, I think this needs to come in, and she's like, well, I'm the one that makes the decision, so whatever. She's that was in front of the jury too, so that's rough. But overall, I think that witness was terrible for the state. But I also know more about the situation than the jurors did at that moment. So if I was a juror, would I think that it was as bad as it was for the state? I don't know. I guess not, because they found him guilty and sided with the state. So whatever. All right, so that is what I have for you guys today for Trial Transcripts Exposed. I will be back next week for an all new episode, and we will continue on with the state's testimony. Thanks, guys, for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys. That's the end of this Trial Transcripts Exposed. Thanks for following along with me. Like if you want more, subscribe, and let me know what you think in the comments below. See you next time.